I'm Katie Allman reporting for Katie Chats at SMITHEE TV in downtown Toronto. Hi, I'm Katie Allman reporting for Katie Chats in downtown Toronto with filmmaker Sean Garrity. How many languages do you speak and what are they?
English, a bit, and Spanish and Japanese, and then my French is I'm forgetting all of them except for English. Every day I forget a little bit of all the languages I know.
How did you pick up these various languages?
Just by traveling and living. Like I lived in Argentina for a couple of years, and I lived in Japan for a very long time, and lived in Quebec for quite a while, and just kind of picked them up as opposed to starving to death, which would have been my option, I suppose.
And how did these years of traveling influence your career as a filmmaker?
That's a really interesting question. And the answer is that I don't really know. I mean, there is an influence, and I've had people who know me look at my films and say, oh yeah, I see the influence of your traveling here and there, but I'm not sure that I see it myself. I think there's always a sense of, with a lot of my films, characters who are interested in something beyond their lives. So this sense of there's something out there that's got to be better than this or more interesting than this, that kind of universal human sense of this is somehow not as good as it should be. And maybe it's that. Maybe that is the thing that made me travel as much as I did, and then it plays into the films that way. Maybe that's a guess.
All right. And recently your feature film Blood Pressure screened in 25 theaters across Canada. Tell me a little bit about the distribution process you went through for that.
Yeah, for Blood Pressure, I was very interested in giving it a healthy theatrical run. I mean, as we all are with our own films. And I really felt that because it's very focused on a sort of 30-plus female demographic, that would be a really healthy film to put in theaters, because a lot of people in that demographic kind of drive what movie you choose going to see in the end. But my distributor, Mongrel Media, didn't feel that way, and they thought that it would sort of not do as well theatrically. And because we have a very good relationship and a very long relationship, I've done a bunch of my films with Mongrel, I sort of said, well, you know what, then why don't we agree to disagree, and I will take the theatrical and do it myself, and let you guys do everything else. And they were totally cool with that, and offered their expertise. So through the process of releasing the film myself, whenever I came up against something that I didn't understand, which was like every day, I would call Mongrel and say, hey, this theater's asking me this. What do I say, and what do they mean? And so really I got this free education on how to distribute a film theatrically, thanks to Mongrel. But doing it myself meant that I really went after any city that had a theater that would play it. Mm-hmm. And I was very interested in sort of using the theatrical as a kind of a publicity step for the further processes of the film, like for the television and the pay TV and the downloads and all that, where the film ideally would make more of its money. And I sort of felt that if I could get Blood Pressure into as many cities as possible, which meant that the papers in all those cities would review it, and I worked very hard to try and get radio and TV coverage as well in every city that it played in, then there'd be some name recognition for it, and when it pops up on people's iTunes, ideally they kind of go, oh yeah, that's... and last week on Rogers TV, we were the #1 Canadian film on the download, so maybe it worked.
Congratulations. And recently you were also at the Open Roof Film Festival in Toronto with My Awkward Sexual Adventure. What sets that festival apart from others?
That's a really cool festival. I mean, you really celebrate the spaces that we have, the urban spaces that we have. And meshing, I think, the art and the space that we have is a really cool concept, especially in Toronto, where our waterfront is so invisible to us behind that wall of condos that keeps us separate from our water. I mean, most streets you look down at and you just see buildings, and it's so cool to be right beside the water and have this sense that we are in this city on a lake, and then watch a movie outside. I'm old enough that I remember drive-ins and how cool those used to be when I was a kid. My dad would take me to see movies at the drive-in. And you don't have those anymore. They're all gone now. But the Open Roof Festival feels like kind of a bit of a throwback to that.
Cool. You've made such a diverse range of films so far with sexual comedy, and then, you know, started out with inertia. Well, there's so many. But where do you see yourself going in the future?
That is interesting. I hope that I will just get better. I don't know. That's what I hope. I don't really, I mean, as you saw by looking through the films that I've done, I kind of, it's almost like I have ADD sometimes. Like I really admire filmmakers who kind of make very similar films, these auteurs who do films that kind of feel like pages in a book or chapters in a book that I really don't have the patience to do that. So once I've done something, I kind of feel like I don't want to do it again. So once I've done a thriller, like I just did, like in the films that I'm developing right now, none of them are thrillers because I kind of feel like I just did that. I don't want to do that again. And it means that, you know, my filmography is a little kind of uneven, I think. But
what's the importance of improvisation in your projects?
That is kind of the key. It's kind of how I started, and I've always been very, very invested in that methodology, and I think it really yields incredibly truthful performances and really interesting dialogue. And there's just so many levels at which I think improv is really a valuable thing to apply to your movie. And it feels counterintuitive because you spend all this money on a movie and you spend all this time preparing everything and getting everything ready right down to the minute details, that to then let actors come into that kind of tornado of activity and just make stuff up. Like, it kind of feels wrong. But I think it is the best way to get performances that are really honest and really surprising and really spontaneous. We do all this stuff. I mean, I know you do some acting as well, and so you're familiar with this process of trying to get in the moment. It's this key for an actor. How do you get to be like really living in that exact moment? And I think the traditional approach where people take text and they have to break it down and they use their Stanislavski and they sort of try to pull it apart and understand what the undercurrent of emotion and motivation is underneath that text so that they can get there and inhabit it. With improv, you go the other way. Like, as soon as we start, you're there. Like, emotionally and motivationally, you're right there where you should be, and then all the text and the action kind of gets layered on top. And I feel like it allows the actor to work from the inside out as opposed to the other way around. And so I'm just a big fan of it.
And do you give the actors a scenario and say go, or what's your directorial process like?
Yeah, every film is different, and I don't use improv the same way in every film. In fact, I don't think I've used improv the same way in any two films. I'm always sort of different in how I use it. But for example, in Blood Pressure, where I was honing a methodology that I developed for a film called Zoe and Adam, my third feature, in Blood Pressure, what I did is I didn't tell any of the actors what the story was. So they didn't see a script because there wasn't any script. I just had a story that I had written, and I didn't show it to them. So none of them knew what the movie was even about. And so God knows why they agreed to do it. But they did, and they would come on set, and I would sort of, we did a bunch of backstory work with them. So we sat down over coffee and sort of decided who they were and who their parents were and where they came from, and, you know, worm food or angel wings and boxers or briefs. So we just kind of figured out all that stuff, right? So we had a really clear picture of this character. And then they're kind of, you know, the super objective, like in life terms, where do they feel that they wanted to go? And then the story would happen, and they would come into these scenarios that I'd set up, and I'd sort of say, okay, we know who you are now, and we know who this guy is now, because he's your husband, and let's now do a scene where this happens. And I would give them secrets to sort of dump on each other in the scene, and they'd have to kind of play it. And usually one of them would have a false objective. So I would know that the scene is about this. I would know the scene is about, so for example, this is not in any of the movies, but as an example, I'd sort of say to the husband, you are trying to reinvigorate your relationship with your wife. It's been failing, things have not been right, and you really want to show your wife how much you love her. So you've booked a hotel in Niagara Falls, you come home Friday, we've got flowers, you're gonna like try spring this romantic getaway on her to try and sort of put a spark back into your marriage. So you start outside, and then I'd say to her, you've been having an affair for the past 6 months. It's come to a point where now you're ready to tell your husband that it's over. Okay, and that's what the scene's really about, right? But he doesn't know that. And I give him this kind of really jubilant thing so he can swing emotionally in the scene, start really high and then And then I just kind of put them together and say, go. Right? And neither of them knows where the other's kind of coming from, but they discover that in the scene. And they kind of are interested to discover it in the scene, right? And it sort of, the fact that he comes with these flowers and this plan throws her a curveball that she's not expecting, and then she has to negotiate that. And they become just really interesting scenes to, like, as a director, to watch. Like, I'm there behind the camera watching them, and I'm fascinated by what's going on.
What advice would you give to an aspiring filmmaker?
Do your own thing, I guess. Because if you try to do something that is somebody else's thing, or something that you think somebody wants to see, you're guessing. In a way, like if you try and make a film that's audience friendly that maybe you don't really think is that interesting, but you want to make it audience friendly, so you guess at what you think audiences want to see, then you're really, I think, in a really weird place aesthetically. So that would be my only advice.
And where's the best place to find out more information on you and Blood Pressure and My Awkward Sexual Adventure and your other projects as well online?
All the movies have their own websites. Usually it's like bloodpressurethemovie.com or lucidthemovie.com. I think it's zoeandadam.com and myawkwardsexualadventure.com. But you can connect to all of them through bedbugsfilms.com, which is bedbugs with an S, films with an S, which is my film company.
Thank you so much, Sean. Congratulations on all of your projects, and best of luck with the ones in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Katie Allman reporting for Katie Chats in downtown Toronto.